Since childhood, I've been able to see the exact amount of money in someone's bank account, floating above their head. At the orphanage, I use this gift to pick adoptive parents who look shabby, but actually have $1 billion sitting in the bank. Unfortunately, I only get to enjoy the good life for a short time before the family's real daughter is brought home. She's furious that I've taken her place and makes it her mission to make my life miserable. In order to stay in school, I swallow every insult and endure her bullying. After finally graduating, I'm ready to walk away from this family forever. But the real daughter stops me. He's fuming as she says, "I thought my online boyfriend was a rich guy with a Ferrari, but it turns out he's just a broke loser who rides a rental bike. If he latches onto me, it'll be a stain on my reputation for life. You go meet him for me. Tell him you're the one he's been dating online." I look in the direction she's pointing and see the man she's talking about. A broke nobody, but the bank balance hovering over his head has 10 digits. I swallow hard, my heart racing as I grabbed the real daughter's arm in excitement. "Quick, tell me everything about your online relationship."
"I'll go meet him right now."
Yvonne Reed let out a mocking laugh. "Seriously, Tessa, have you never seen a man before drooling over a broke loser?"
She tossed her phone at me.
"Since you're that desperate, I'll give him to you. Leave with him and don't ever come back." I memorized every detail and walked up to him. "Hi, I'm Cindy. My real name is Tessa Reed." I smiled and held out my hand. His eyes lit up. "You're even prettier than I imagined. My real name is Calvin Fulton." Yvonne had only sent him blurry photos. Our figures were similar enough that he didn't suspect anything. When I shook his hand, I counted the numbers above his head. 10 digits steadily increasing. If I could latch onto him, I wouldn't just escape my family. I wouldn't need to worry about anything anymore. Calvin gave me a self-conscious look. I'm dressed shabbily, and I came on a rented bike. "Are you embarrassed by me?" He wore worn-out flip-flops and cheap, threadbare clothes. Yvonne had played the part of a poor girl online. I went along with it. "All my clothes are hand-me-downs. Looks like we're both frugal." When he saw my sallow skin and thin frame, his suspicion eased. His test wasn't over. "Let me buy you a meal," he said. He rented a bike for me, making sure I saw his old phone. I took out my own cracked phone and bought him a soda. After biking half an hour, he LED me to a buffet place selling box meals for $15. When I froze, Calvin rubbed his hands nervously. "A whole day of delivering takeout only gets me $80. Are you going to look down on me?" My stomach growled. Of course not. I was adopted, and my adoptive parents stopped supporting me. Once I got into college, I worked part-time for tuition. I usually bought cheap bread and free soup. For me, this is already luxurious. I hurried inside, piling food onto my tray. Sweet and sour pork. Love that. Mashed potatoes. Love that. Bread rolls. Love that. Alvin followed me when he saw how eagerly I ate. Tenderness flickered in his eyes. "So you really do love this stuff?" I was too busy eating to hear him. After a few bites, he put his fork down. Everything he didn't finish ended up in my stomach. When I finished, I patted my full belly. "Thanks. This was the most satisfying meal I've had all year." Don't be so easy to please. Once I start making real money, I'll take you somewhere better. When he offered to walk me home, I waved him off. I'm never going back there. I'll stay in a cheap hostel while I look for a job. Calvin had always been curious about Yvonne's life. In their chats, she always dodged the question. So now I spoke freely. I was adopted. A few days after they brought me home, their biological daughter was sent back. From then on, she bullied me constantly. My adoptive parents knew. They just didn't care. But they gave me food, shelter, and schooling. I'm still grateful. Calvin's hands balled into fists. "So you just put up with it?" I nodded and pulled up my sleeve, showing him scars, burns, scratches, a dog bite. "It's fine. I've graduated now. Once I save enough, I'll pay them back and cut ties." "Tessa, when we started talking, I honestly thought you were just pretending to be pitiful to scam me." Now, he no longer suspected. He looked into my eyes. "If you could make one wish right now, what would it be?" I glanced at his balance. In the time we'd eaten, his assets had gone up another $5 million. Yet he was still pretending to be broke. Asking for money was unrealistic. "I hope I can find a job soon, with room and board, if possible." Calvin raised his brows mysteriously. "Maybe the universe will hear you." After thanking him for lunch, I bought him ice cream. He helped me find a cheap hostel. That evening, he treated me to dinner again. We went our separate ways. To my surprise, I got a call from a listed company's HR. "We saw your resume. You're a great fit. Would you like to come in for an interview?" I knew this came from him. The interview went smoothly. They told me to come back for onboarding. I called Calvin excitedly. "Your mouth is magic. I landed a job with a dorm and meal allowance. I have to treat you to a meal." He agreed. Still in that same cheap outfit. I haven't bought decent clothes in ages.
Hope you don't mind.
His balance had gone up another 80 million since yesterday. I didn't call him out. Once I get my paycheck, I'm buying you new clothes. You can barely afford to feed yourself, and you want to buy me clothes? You were good to me, so I should be good to you. He looked touched. And it wasn't fake. From then on, I threw myself into my new job. I saw Calvin every day. We grew closer. We still ate at cheap street stalls, but he gradually relaxed. On payday, I bought him new clothes, put them on, and said, seriously, Tessa, this is only the start of your good luck. He said he'd be busy for a few days. When he finished, he'd give me a huge surprise. I didn't know what he meant. Part of me preferred him pretending to be poor. At least then we were on equal footing. If he was really some untouchable rich heir, I didn't know how I'd face him. Over the next few days, I couldn't reach Calvin. He'd text occasionally, be patient, wait for me. But before I saw him again, the person I least wanted to see showed up. I had no idea how Ivan found my address. So are you with my online boyfriend? Tell him to come here. She shoved her phone in my face. I checked the financial news. He looks exactly like the Fulton family's heir. The photo showed Calvin at an overseas event. Custom suit, $1 million watch, Rolls-Royce bodyguards. So he really was the heir to the most powerful family in our city. Nearly burst out laughing. This rich heir had dressed shabbily and eaten cheap street food, just to test his online girlfriend. Afraid Yvonne would expose me, I tried to calm her down. You're overthinking it. The first time he treated me was a $15 box meal. He only has one set of clothes. His slippers are falling apart. How could he be the Fulton heir? I showed her photos of us at street stalls. She scrolled for a while, then looked at my worn-out clothes. Only then did she reluctantly believe me. Makes sense. If he were rich, he'd spend money on you. And someone that high class wouldn't go for a broke nobody like you. Before leaving, she sneered, you were born pathetic, Tessa. Trash like you belongs with losers. Don't you dare say you're from the Reed family. I swallowed my resentment. A tiny hope rose in my chest. If one day Calvin stood by my side and made her eat her words. I only indulged that fantasy for a few seconds. Calvin had already given me a good job that was hitting the jackpot. How could I hope for more? I kept my head down and got through another 3 peaceful days. That day after work, I just stepped out of the company building when a Rolls-Royce suddenly pulled up right in front of me. The rear window slowly rolled down. Calvin's face, both familiar and strangely distant at the same time, appeared before my eyes. Tessa,
Get in,
there's something I need to talk to you about,
he said.
All the other employees stopped in their tracks, staring and whispering. My mind short-circuited. I couldn't believe Calvin had actually revealed his identity. In front of everyone. Seen me frozen. Calvin chuckled and opened the door, stepping out of the car. What are you spacing out for? We've only been apart for a few days. And you've already forgotten me. As he walked toward me with that gentle look in his eyes, my heart pounded violently. Maybe miracles really did happen. Just as I hesitated, a shrill voice suddenly rang out from behind me. Mr. Fulton, Tessa has tricked you. She's not the real Cindy, who's been chatting with you online. He's an imposter. My breath hitched, and I stiffly turned around. Ivan came charging over. I'm Ivan Reed. I'm Cindy, the one who was really in an online relationship with you. When I saw Calvin's expression darken, I felt like I'd been plunged into an ice-cold abyss. All the blood drained from my face. I was done for. I wanted so badly to explain, but fear made my throat close up. Contemptuous, mocking stares closed in on me from every direction. Look, this is my account. These are our chat logs. And these are the photos I sent you. I have tons of proof that Tessa has been lying to you. You can't let this scammer off the hook. Ivan cried. Yvonne's voice was like a rusty blade scraping against glass, shattering the tense silence of the evening. The crowd of employees from my company, who had stopped to gawk at the sleek, midnight black Rolls-Royce, whispered and leaned in closer. I stood frozen on the pavement. My chest felt tight, my breath hitching in my throat. I looked at the crowd, then at Yvonne, whose face was contorted with a mixture of spite and triumphant glee. Finally, my eyes drifted to Calvin. Above his head, the floating 10-digit number, $3,450,892,100, shimmered steadily. It didn't flicker. It remained a constant, staggering testament to the absurd reality of his existence. Then, I glanced at Yvonne. Above her head floated a paltry sum, $15,200. She thought she was a struggling girl, desperate to latch onto a wealthy heir to escape her shabby life. The ultimate irony was that her parents, the eccentric, secretive Reeds who had adopted me from the orphanage, actually had $1,200,500,000 sitting in offshore accounts and private trusts. They had spent their entire lives hiding their wealth from Yvonne, forcing her to grow up humbly, to prevent her from becoming spoiled. But their experiment had failed miserably. Yvonne had grown up greedy, bitter, and obsessed with status, completely unaware that she was already a billionaire's daughter. And now, she was standing here, waving her phone like a weapon, trying to tear down the only thin shred of hope I had left. "Look, Mr. Fulton," Yvonne cried out, her voice rising to a screech. "This is my account. These are our chat logs, and these are the photos I sent you. I have tons of proof that Tessa has been lying to you. She's a parasite. She saw my phone, realized who you were, and decided to steal my place." I closed my eyes, preparing for the inevitable. The cold dread washed over me. I had run away from the Reed family, yes, but I had done it by stepping into a lie. I had let Calvin believe I was the girl from the chats. Even if he didn't hate me, the illusion was shattered. Before I could speak, a hand gently but firmly wrapped around my wrist. The warmth of his palm startled me. I opened my eyes. Calvin wasn't looking at Yvonne. He was looking at me, his gaze soft, though a quiet intensity flickered in his dark eyes. "Tessa," he said, his voice remarkably calm amidst the storm. "Is it true? You aren't the one who sent those messages." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I couldn't lie to him.
Not now.
"It's true," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm not the girl from the chat. I took her place because she wanted me to meet her broke boyfriend. I wanted so badly to escape my life, and I went along with it. I'm sorry, Calvin. I'm so sorry." Yvonne let out a sharp, mocking laugh.
See.
"She admits it. She's a fraud, Mr. Fulton. Now, about our relationship." "Be quiet," Calvin said. The words were not loud, but they carried a freezing weight that cut through the air like a scalpel. Yvonne's laugh died in her throat. She stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Calvin slowly turned his head to look at her. The gentle warmth he usually showed me was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, aristocratic disdain that made the surrounding crowd instinctively take a step back. "You say you're the one I chatted with," Calvin said, his tone smooth and dangerous. "The one who called herself Cindy?"
Yes.
"Yes, that's me," Yvonne said, quickly trying to recover her composure. She smoothed down her jacket, stepping closer to the car. "I'm the one you've been talking to for 6 months. The same Cindy who, 3 weeks ago, sent me a message complaining about how disgusting poor people are and how you couldn't wait to find a wealthy man to buy you a Chanel bag?" Calvin asked. Yvonne's face drained of color. I was just joking, Mr. Fulton. You know how online humor is." "And the same Cindy who told me she was starving because her evil adoptive sister stole her tuition money, when in reality, you were spending your parents' allowance on designer shoes?" Calvin continued, taking a step toward her. Yvonne stammers, looking around at the whispering crowd. "I know. She did steal from me. Tessa is a monster. The person I chatted with online," Calvin said, his eyes narrowing, "was a shallow, manipulative, and incredibly transparent social climber. I knew within 3 days of talking to her that she was a fake. The only reason I kept talking to her was to see how far she would go to try and scam me." He looked down at Yvonne, his expression filled with pure disgust. "But the girl who actually showed up to meet me," Calvin said, turning his gaze back to me, his hand still holding my wrist, "didn't care about my rented bike. She didn't look down on my worn-out clothes. She bought me a soda with her last few dollars, ate a $15 boxed meal like it was a royal feast, and showed me her scars without asking for a single cent of sympathy. She didn't want my money.
She wanted a job.
She wanted a life." He looked back at Yvonne, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a death knell. "You think you're the one I want? I wouldn't spend a single copper on someone like you. Tessa is the one I chose. It doesn't matter whose name was on the screen. The person standing next to me right now is the only one who matters." A collective gasp echoed through the crowd of employees. Yvonne stood frozen, her face burning a bright, humiliated red. She looked at me, then at Calvin, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped her phone. You're choosing her?" Yvonne hissed, her voice cracking with fury. "She's a charity case. A nobody. My parents can ruin her with a single phone call. They still have legal custody over her medical records and financial history. She will never escape us." Calvin smiled, a cold, humorless curve of his lips. "Your parents? The Reeds? Let them try." He opened the passenger door of the Rolls-Royce and looked at me, his eyes softening instantly. "Get in, Tessa." Without a second thought, I stepped into the car. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, sealing out the noise of the street, the whispers of my coworkers, and Yvonne's hysterical screams. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was a sanctuary of soft leather and quiet luxury. As the car smoothly pulled away from the curb, I stared at my hands, my heart still hammering against my ribs. "Are you all right?" Calvin asked, steering the car through the evening traffic. I think so," I murmured. I turned to look at him. His tailored suit fit him perfectly, a stark contrast to the threadbare t-shirt and worn-out flip-flops he had worn just a few days ago. Above him, the $3.4 billion balance remained unchanged. "You knew," I said softly. "You knew the whole time." Calvin chuckled, a warm, rich sound. "I suspected it the moment you introduced yourself." The online Cindy had a completely different vocabulary, a different rhythm of typing, and an ego the size of a skyscraper. When you showed up, you were nervous, incredibly polite, and so thin I thought a gust of wind might blow you away. I wanted to see who you really were. And the more time I spent with you, the more I realized I didn't care about the girl behind the keyboard. I cared about the girl in front of me. He paused, glancing at me. "But I have to ask, how did you know I was rich? You didn't seem surprised when I showed up in this car." I blinked, realizing I had to be careful. I couldn't tell him about the floating numbers above his head. He would think I was insane. "Your wrist," I said, improvising quickly. "When we first met, you were wearing cheap clothes, but you had a very distinct, heavy tan line on your left wrist, the kind left by a thick, high-end luxury watch. And your posture. People who are truly struggling to make ends meet don't carry themselves with the quiet confidence of someone who owns the city. You walked like a king, Calvin, even in flip-flops." Calvin stared at me for a moment, then burst into laughter. "Smart girl. I suppose I'm not as good an actor as I thought. But I still lied to you," I said, my voice dropping. "I used the opportunity to run away from my family. I wanted to use you to get a job. And I used my resources to give you that job because you deserved it," Calvin replied gently.
We're even, Tesha.
"But your family, Yvonne mentioned they still have hold over you. Tell me the truth. What did they do to you?" I pulled my sleeve down slightly, covering the faint white scars on my forearm. "They adopted me because they thought they couldn't have children. For a few years, they treated me well. But then Yvonne was found. She had been switched at birth, living with a distant relative. When she came back, she hated me instantly. She saw me as an imposter who had stolen her life." I took a deep breath, the memories tasting like ash. My parents felt so guilty about losing her that they let her do whatever she wanted. She bullied me, burned my things, and eventually, they stopped supporting me entirely. They cut off my tuition, my food, everything. I had to work 3 part-time jobs just to survive college. I tolerated it because I thought I owed them for taking me out of the orphanage. Calvin's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. "They will pay for what they did to you. I promise you that." "No, Calvin, please," I said quickly. "I just want to cut ties with them. I don't want their money, and I don't want their drama. I just want to live my life." Calvin looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, protective warmth. "If that's what you want, then that's what we'll do. But first, let's get some dinner. Real dinner this time. No $15 box meals." I smiled, feeling a genuine sense of peace for the first time in years. "Actually, I wouldn't mind those box meals again. As long as I'm with you." The next 3 days were the happiest of my life. I moved out of the cheap hostel and into a beautiful, quiet apartment that Calvin had arranged for me near the company. I threw myself into my work, proving to everyone and myself that I belonged there, not because of Calvin's influence, but because of my own merit. But the peace didn't last. On Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting a message from Calvin. Instead, a familiar, cold name flashed on the screen. Eleanor Reed. My adoptive mother. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the decline button. But I knew if I didn't answer, they would only hunt me down at my workplace. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "Tessa." Eleanor's voice was sharp, carrying its usual tone of quiet authority. "Come to the family home tonight at 7. We need to talk." "I don't think we have anything to talk about, Mother," I said, the word mother feeling heavy and unnatural on my tongue. "I've graduated. I'm independent now." "Do not test my patience, Tessa," Eleanor snapped. "Yvonne came home in tears. She told us what you did. You stole her fiancé, disgraced our family name, and paraded around with the Fulton air. If you do not show up tonight, we will file a police report claiming you stole Yvonne's personal identity documents and her phone. We will ruin your career before it even begins." My blood ran cold. They were desperate. Yvonne must have thrown a massive tantrum, and my parents, as always, were willing to do whatever it took to appease her. "I'll be there," I said quietly and hung up. Before I could spiral into a panic, my office door opened, and Calvin walked in. He took one look at my pale face and immediately closed the door behind him. "What's wrong?" he asked, walking over to press his hands against my desk, leaning in close. "My adoptive mother called," I said, looking up at him. "They want me to go to their house tonight. Yvonne is threatening to sue me for identity theft. They want to force me to give you up, or at least ruin my reputation." Calvin's eyes darkened, a dangerous glint appearing in them. "They want a confrontation? Fine. We'll give them one. I'm coming with you. Calvin, no, I said, shaking my head. You don't understand. They are different. They look shabby. They live in a rundown suburban house, but they have resources you don't know about. I've always known it. They aren't who they pretend to be. Calvin raised an eyebrow, a slow, intrigued smile spreading across his face. Oh,
Tell me.
I hesitated. I couldn't tell him about my power, but I could tell him what I had deduced. When I was at the orphanage, I saw their bank records. They have over $1 billion, Calvin. They live in a cheap house and pretend to be middle class because they are eccentric and paranoid about wealth corrupting their family. They've kept it a secret from Yvonne to keep her humble, though it clearly didn't work. If you go there, it might escalate into a war between your family and theirs. Calvin's smile only grew wider, his eyes shining with a mixture of amusement and deep admiration. $1 billion? The Reeds, of course. My father once mentioned a silent partner who owned half the shipping docks in the eastern sector. They vanished from the high society scene decades ago, choosing to live like hermits. I never connected the dots. He leaned in, his voice whispering in my ear. Don't worry, Tessa. If they want a war, they've picked the wrong opponent. Let's go pay your humble parents a visit. The Reed family home was a deceptively modest, slightly rundown double-story house in a quiet suburb. The paint on the outer walls was peeling, and the lawn was overgrown with weeds. To any passerby, it looked like the home of a struggling, lower-middle-class family. But as Calvin and I stepped out of his car, my eyes instantly locked onto the massive, glowing numbers floating above the roof of the house. Thomas Reed, $1,200,500,000. Eleanor Reed, $1,200,500,000. The numbers were identical, a joint trust of staggering wealth hidden beneath a facade of rotting wood and cheap gravel. Calvin took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Ready? I nodded, swallowing my fear. Ready. We walked up the creaking wooden steps, and before I could knock, the front door was swung open. Yvonne stood there, her eyes red from crying, but her face twisted into a smug, triumphant grin when she saw me. You actually showed up, Yvonne sneered. And you brought your little prize.
Dad. Mom.
They're here. She stepped back, allowing us into the living room. The interior was deliberately furnished with cheap, worn-out furniture from thrift stores. An old, boxy television sat in the corner, and the linoleum floor was scuffed and peeling at the edges. Sitting on the faded floral sofa were Thomas and Eleanor Reed. Thomas wore a stained flannel shirt and worn-out jeans, while Eleanor wore a simple, faded house dress. They looked like tired, hard-working people who had spent their lives struggling. But I knew the truth. Tessa, Thomas said, his voice deep and stern as he stood up. You have crossed the line. We took you in, we gave you a roof over your head, and this is how you repay us? By stealing your sister's identity and scheming to take her place with Mr. Fulton? Eleanor joined in, her voice dripping with disappointed righteousness. We raised you to be honest, Tessa. We may be poor, we may live a simple life, but we have our dignity. You have brought shame upon this household by acting like a desperate, gold-digging thief. Yvonne crossed her arms, smirking from the corner. You hear that, Tessa? You're a thief. Mr. Fulton, you need to see her for what she really is. She's just a greedy parasite who wanted to climb into high society. I stood in the center of the room, holding Calvin's hand. I felt a cold, clear calmness wash over me. The fear that had haunted me for years suddenly vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of absurdity. I looked at Thomas. I looked at Eleanor. Dignity. I asked, my voice quiet but echoing clearly in the small room. Is that what you call this, mother? Father? Eleanor frowned. What do you mean? I mean this entire masquerade, I said, gesturing to the peeling wallpaper, the cheap sofa, and the stained clothes. You talk about dignity, yet you have spent the last 20 years playing a sick, twisted game. You pretend to be struggling middle-class citizens, forcing your daughters to live in poverty, while you have exactly $1,200,500,000 sitting in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and private Swiss trusts. The room went dead silent. Thomas Reed's eyes widened in absolute, paralyzing shock. Eleanor gasps, her hand flying to her mouth, accidentally knocking her cheap ceramic teacup off the side table. It shattered on the linoleum floor, the sound sharp and violent in the quiet room. Yvonne blinked, looking confused. What? Tessa, what are you babbling about? 1.2 billion? Are you insane? We're poor. We've always been poor. I turned to Yvonne, a look of pity on my face. Yvonne, your parents have been lying to you your entire life. They aren't poor. They are richer than almost anyone in this city. They let you believe you were struggling because they were terrified that wealth would corrupt you. But look at you. Their little experiment backfired. Because you thought you were poor, you became so desperate and greedy that you tried to scam Calvin online. And they let you bully me, starve me, and abuse me, all while sitting on a mountain of gold, just to appease their guilt for losing you. Thomas's face turned a ghostly pale. He took a step back, his hands trembling.
How? How do you know about that?
That's impossible. Nobody knows about our family trusts except our private Swiss bankers. Calvin, standing beside me, let out a soft, amused chuckle. He stepped forward, his presence instantly dominating the small, shabby room. The secret reads of the Reed shipping empire, Calvin said, his voice smooth and dripping with authority. My father always wondered where his silent partner disappeared to. You took your shares, liquidated them into private offshore accounts, and vanished into the suburbs. I must admit, Thomas, living in a dump like this while holding $1 billion portfolio is a level of commitment I didn't expect. Yvonne's brain seemed to short-circuit. She looked from her parents' terrified faces to Calvin, and then to me. No, this is a lie. Yvonne screamed, her voice cracking.
Dad.
Tell me she's lying. We don't have $1 billion. If we had that much money, why did I have to ride the bus? Why did I have to wear hand-me-downs? Why did you make me feel like trash compared to the rich kids at school? Thomas couldn't look her in the eye. He stared at the floor, his shoulders slumping. Yvonne, we did it for your own good. We wanted you to grow up humble. We wanted you to value hard work. Humble, Yvonne shrieked, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unbridled rage. I hated my life. I spent every single day trying to find a rich man to save me, and all this time, I was richer than him. You lied to me. You ruined my life. She turned on her parents, her eyes wild with greed. Give me my money. Give me my inheritance right now. I want my share. I want my hundreds of millions. Thomas looked at his biological daughter, his expression shifting from guilt to profound disgust. Look at yourself, Yvonne. This is exactly why we hid it from you. You are greedy, vicious, and spoiled. You treated Tessa like a dog, and now you demand our hard-earned money? You haven't earned a single cent of it. He turned back to me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading sorrow. Tessa, we are sorry. We felt so guilty about Yvonne. We thought if we let her have her way, she would feel loved. We didn't realize. We didn't know you knew. You didn't care, I said, my voice cold and flat. You knew she was hurting me. You saw the burns, the bruises, the scars. You just chose to look the other way because it was easier to sacrifice your adopted daughter to buy peace with your biological one. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, white envelope. I walked over and placed it on the worn-out coffee table, right next to the shattered teacup. What is this? Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. It's a check, I said. It contains $50,000. I've calculated the exact cost of the food, shelter, and public school tuition you provided for me since I was adopted. It's all in there with interest. From this day forward, I owe you nothing. We are strangers. Thomas stared at the envelope, his lips trembling. Tessa, please. We are your parents. We adopted you. We loved you. No, I said, turning my back on them. You stopped being my parents the moment you stood by and watched her destroy me. You chose your biological blood. Now live with your choice. Calvin wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close to his side. He looked at the Reed family one last time, his eyes cold and unyielding. If I ever see any of you near Tessa again, Calvin said, his voice quiet but carrying the full, terrifying weight of the Fulton family name, I will personally ensure that the Reed shipping empire's offshore trusts are fully investigated by the federal tax authorities. I wonder how humble you'll feel when the government takes every single penny of your billion-dollar fortune. Thomas and Eleanor froze, their faces completely drained of color. They knew he wasn't joking. Calvin turned to me, his expression softening instantly into a gentle, loving smile. Let's go home, Tessa. Yes, I said, looking up at him. Let's go home. We walked out of the shabby house, leaving behind the screams of Yvonne demanding her inheritance and the weeping of my adoptive parents. The night air was cool and fresh, washing away the suffocating dust of my past. As we got back into the Rolls-Royce, I leaned my head against the soft leather seat, letting out a long, deep breath. For the first time in my life, when I looked at Calvin, I didn't look at the glowing 10-digit number floating above his head. I didn't care about the billions. I didn't care about the wealth, the status, or the security. I looked at his face, his warm eyes, his gentle smile, and the quiet strength that had shielded me when I needed it most. Calvin started the engine, the car purring to life. He reached over, taking my hand and kissing the back of it gently. Where to, my lady? He asked, his eyes twinkling. I smiled, my heart finally at peace. Anywhere. As long as it's with you,